learners, welcome to today's session. Today what we are going to discuss is on the practical arrangements and handling difficult situations, and this is part of block 4 of your course BSW 124. We are talking about the practical issues in counseling in unit 5, and this is the part 1 of the video. And what we are going to do is today is that we shall discuss some practical issues that are associated with counseling. And after watching this video, you will be able to know the practical arrangements required for counseling. What are the nitty-gritties? What are the nuances of counseling? What are the practical arrangements which a counselor should keep it in mind? How to handle the difficult situations in sessions? So these two objectives will be met in this video, and in the part 2 what we will cover is common problems to guard against when the problems could be related to the counselor or the client, and other miscellaneous practical issues connected with counseling. Counseling is a professional service and it requires trained personnel, and each society and community has its own vision and methods of dealing with crisis situation. Say for example, in developed nations, there are many qualified counselors who are available for the services. However, when we talk about the Indian situation, there are limited training opportunities, and the growing demand of counseling, particularly to deal with issues arising out of emerging and re-emerging diseases, requires immediate attention. In this situation, the question arises that who should be the client? Counseling is basically the provision of guidance and support to those with psychological problems that are personal or interpersonal in nature. And when the problems are personal, the individual is the focus of counseling. And when does the group come in picture? The group to which the individual belongs can also profitably be included. Say for example, when counseling an alcoholic, it is very important to counsel his family also. So in that situation, the group would be included. And when the problems are interpersonal, the group is the focus of counseling. During marital counseling, it often helps to have special sessions for each spouse. So individuals in the group may also benefit from independent counseling. Very often, individuals resist being singled out or included in groups for counseling. For example, an alcoholic's wife, she refuses to understand that she could be somewhere related to the problems, and she often blames the husband only. So she refuses counseling because she doesn't take any responsibility for the husband's alcoholism. Or a father who refuses counseling because he believes that his delinquent son is delinquent because of the bad company he is taking, and he is not at all responsible in his son's behavior. So he blames the son and refuses any kind of counseling. In such situations, counselor must enlist cooperation and involvement of the concerned persons, and this has to be done tactfully because there is resistance from the clients. The second question which arises is, where should counseling be conducted? Often formal setting is required, say in counseling centers, hospitals, or any appropriate place which is formal in nature. Domestic or public spaces should be avoided because it often lacks seriousness. Counseling should never take place in any situation in which there are frequent interruptions or disturbances, because that disrupt the continuity of the sessions. Like if they say in a marketplace or it's just happening in a restaurant, that is not appropriate because there would be frequent interruptions. Privacy is very essential. So there should be no shared rooms, like for example, a room where another session is going on, or say even though they are not involved or not interrupting, still privacy is very important, and so it should be in a separate room. Client will not feel comfortable if there are other persons who are sharing the room in which the session is proceeding. Now, when it comes to seating arrangements, how should the counselor and client sit? So, counselor and client should face each other. It could be across the desk or it could be open seating, depends on the comfort of both the client and the counselor. and they should maintain appropriate distance, not too close, not too far. Appropriate enough to understand and comfortably sit and face each other. When it comes to payment for counseling, free services are of course accessible. There are many NGOs who are committed to the provision of providing free counseling services, but at times it is less valued by the client because it is free. The clients many a times do not take it seriously. However, when there are paid services, it is often taken seriously by the clients. So, it again depends on the organizational policy. It is an administrative matter, and it depends on the organizational policy. The duration of this session, the standard duration is 40 to 50 minutes. There are shorter sessions, but they may not adequately be therapeutic. If there are sessions which are very long, it can be very tiring, except of course in the crisis situations when there are long sessions required. So, it depends on the situation, the problem of the client, that the session duration is usually decided by the counselor, and depending on the client situation, so that it is adequately therapeutic. Usually the follow-up sessions are shorter in duration, and as compared to the initial sessions which are more longer. Now, the frequency of sessions also depends on the situation and the problem of the client. Say for example, in crisis situations, there are usually daily sessions which are conducted. If the problems are long term, then weekly sessions are preferred. And in the initial phase, when the counselor needs to know details about the client and the sessions are quite intense and little longer, then 2 to 3 times a week can be scheduled, and later it can be tapered to weekly sessions. And once the initial sessions are done and some time passes by, then the follow-up session could be held fortnightly or monthly. Now, how do you decide how many sessions will a client need? So, for a very few clients, a single session will be sufficient. For some clients, the counseling may need to continue even for several months. But majority of clients will require counseling for periods that lie in between the two, say between single and between several months. The number of the sessions and duration of therapy, it depends on the nature of the problem and the progress that the client makes in therapy, because each client is unique, and how he or she may progress in the therapy, that determines the duration of the session as well as the frequency of the session. Now, when we talk about the handling difficult situation, what all we need to know is first the opening of the client, because initially the client feels it quite difficult to open up. Then there are also situations when there are long silences during sessions. Then how do you deal with that? What happens when the client starts crying? How does both the counselor and the client deal with that? Then when there are excessive emotional reactions, and there are also situations when counselors get stuck for ideas, like how do you open up a conversation? So, first we'll talk about what should a counselor do if a clients find it hard to open up in therapy. The first and the foremost thing what the counselor should do is they should convey an air of kindness, patience and understanding, because that is the key to counseling. He or she should accustom his or her client to talking about neutral issues. It could be like talking about the likes, dislike, the love life, the friends, what is the education. It could be anything like how are you feeling today, or what do you like to do. Simple situation, who are your friends? These could be simpler questions to ask to initially, and they are neutral issues usually. Next, what they should do is they should approach the problem areas such as family or love life, and that is tactfully, because if the problem areas are family or love life, it has to be approached tactfully. And as the client begins to feel more comfortable, the counselor can target the more specific issues for which the client has approached the counselor. And what happens when the counselor meets silences during the counseling session? Because there are often point in the counseling sessions when there is long silence, and silences may mean anything, like the client may have finished what he had to say, or he or she may be thinking of what to say next. Maybe they are reluctant to discuss the issue further. It could be also overwhelming for the client to express the feelings, or maybe the client is experiencing a mental block. It could be interpreted in any way, or maybe they are considering some important thoughts which have just occurred to him or her, or which the counselor might have suggested. Or the client may be feeling hostile towards the therapy or the counselor. Maybe they want more reassurance from the counselor about the issue which has just been discussed. So the silences could mean anything. And how to handle these silences, that is the challenge for the counselor. So in such situations, the counselor should decide which one of these possibility is most likely. A clue that can assist him or her to decide is a consideration of what triggered the silence. That is important. In some situations, the client may need to be given the opportunity to think his or her way out, because that the counselor has to gaze and understand whether there is a particular discussion which has triggered that silence, and whether an opportunity should be given to the client to think more and think his way or her way out of the situation. In other situations, the counselor may need to break the silence, say guide the client or shift to other topics for the moment and return to the critical area later. Because if there are certain issues which is disturbing the client and that has triggered the silence, then there is a need to shift the topic at that moment, so that the client opens up and talks about it. A useful tip is to gently probe with questions such as, what are you thinking of? Because that will help the client to open up when we ask, what are you thinking of? What should the counselor do if the client begins to cry? Because there could be situations when the what the counselor has asked has triggered, say, the client to cry. Then many counselors feel uncomfortable if a client begins to cry during a session. Their instinctive reaction is to reassure the client with a there, don't cry, it's not so bad sort of response. That is the usual response anybody gives, is don't cry, it's not so bad. But such a response is entirely inappropriate. A client's tears should not embarrass the counselor. The tears are basically a manifestation of the client's trust, because the client has started trusting the counselor, and that is why he or she can reveal his or her innermost feelings to the counselor. Or say, in other words, the client is ventilating his or her emotions. What is the proper response then? The proper response of the counselor is to allow the client to express their emotions and to allow the tears to dry up on their own. The counselor should not wait until the client has stopped crying. Because what will happen then? This will draw pointed attention to the client's reaction and make the client embarrassed for crying. Because if you stop and just see the client crying, that may embarrass the client. So what the counselor has to do is they have to continue and the discussion, and in a kindlier tone. And if he or she considers it necessary, the counselor may add a sympathetic remark like, say, this has upset you very much, hasn't it? Rather than pausing or allowing the client just to cry and pause and watch the client cry. Now, what happens when there are excessive emotional reactions? Say the client may overreact. It could be anger or excessive weeping or excessive anger. Then what the counselor has to do? Counselor has to basically allow the venting to happen first, First, if the client is, say, weeping, then allow the client to weep while discussing the issue, and then analyze reasons, help the client to understand the appropriateness of the reaction, whether the overreaction was appropriate or inappropriate. That has to be made to understand, and then abort expressions if emotions are histrionic or disruptive. What should the counselor do if the counselor gets stuck for ideas? Then they could, because it happens many a times, like a counselor often gets stuck for ideas, how to open up the discussion if the client is silent or not getting engaged in discussion. Then they could ask simple questions like neutral questions: what makes you happy, or what do you do to make yourself happy, or whom do you love, who loves you, or who are the people in whom you confide, how do you take care of yourself. So these are simple questions. Tell me about yourself. These are questions which will open up the discussion and allow the client to talk. So thank you very much. This is it in this part, and in part 2 we will continue the discussion on the other two objectives of BSW 124, Block 4, Unit 5. Thank you.